for those of you who don't know me and haven't met me. And I am on the board of the Kensington Conservancy. And we are doing these webinars, we being the royal we, because Carter's doing the webinars. I'm just doing an introduction to him. We have had one so far, and it was very well received. And I think that's why we have so many people joining us again tonight, some new faces and some people who are coming back for the second shot, so to speak. Carter, you probably have met if you've been involved with the Kensington Conservancy at all. He was our program manager and very visible, took people on hikes, identified birds, flowers, animals, things that we thought we knew, but probably didn't. Anyway, he's been a great help to the Conservancy. And with Tana's retirement, he is acting executive director right now. And to let you in on a little news, he will be the executive director in the middle of April. So anything to do with the Conservancy, he's going to be your man. So we are happy to have him to ourselves to speak to us tonight, because once he takes over, he's probably going to be really busy. We're all very glad that we have Carter with us, and he certainly has the knowledge, the base knowledge of the Conservancy and the vision and mandate that we have. And I hope at some point all of you will get to meet him in person and welcome him to the group as the acting or as the executive director. Tonight, we're going to go through another webinar, and Carter will be leading that. If you have any questions, you can either raise your hand with on the screen at the bottom, or you can actually just raise your hand. We accept either one of those. So I think we'll get started here now. And Carter, if you would like to take over.
Sure. Thanks, Alice, for the nice introduction. Just a couple more housekeeping things. I'm hearing a bit of background noise from somebody who's not muted. So if you're able to mute yourself during the presentation, that'd be great. And Alice, if there are questions, you're going to have to let me know, because once I get it going, I won't be able to see if people are putting up their hands or anything. But chances are most people will probably wait to the end of the presentation for questions anyway. So let's, I'm just going to start sharing my screen here. There we go. Okay, so again, welcome everyone to my presentation tonight about community science. This is a passion of mine. I spend a lot of my free time, and luckily it ties into work as well, contributing to community science. So I know a lot about it. The first question, some of you people might not know what community science is. The definition is the collection and analysis of data relating to the natural world by members of the general public, typically as part of a collaborative project with professional scientists. So it's basically members of the community going out and collecting data about all types of different scientific related things. You probably also know this as you might have heard of citizen science. It's the same concept. Community science is just kind of the new name for it these days. So there's a whole wide variety of different community science projects. These are the ones here listed that are the most common ones in Ontario, but there's lots. There's tons of different community science. A simple Google search will probably bring up a lot more. The main one that I'm going to be talking about tonight is iNaturalist. This is a community science project where you can submit data on any type of living organism, whether it be a mammal, a bird, a fish, plant, a mushroom, lichen, anything that's alive. Ebird, this one is probably, I'm pretty sure, the largest community science project in the world based on the number of data points collected and the number of users. Birding is probably the most popular of the different niche groups in the world. So a lot of birders are using Ebird. It is run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology out in New York State. The next one in Ontario, they have the Ontario Reptile and Amphibian Atlas. This is where you can submit data on reptiles and amphibians, so frogs, snakes, turtles, salamanders, that kind of thing. Next one, EDMAPS. This stands for, I have to check my notes here to make sure I get it right, the Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System, which is for invasive species. So the idea of this one is if you see an invasive species somewhere, you should report it to EDMAPS, and then corrective action can be taken if necessary. So the idea is to kind of detect these invasive species before they get a stronghold in a location and it's easier to eradicate them. E-butterfly is much like eBird. It's kind of set up the same way, but obviously deals with butterflies instead of birds. Journey North, this one is, it kind of tracks different organisms as they travel northward during spring migration. The two most popular ones that they track are hummingbirds and monarch butterflies, because just a lot of people like hummingbirds and a lot of people like monarchs. So there's a lot of interest there. And that's where they get most of their data, from those two species. But they also track things like loons and American robins and other popular birds that migrate north in the spring. And they also keep track of things that not necessarily migrating, but like when frogs and earthworms come out of the ground, and when the leaves start blooming, coming out of the buds, and when the ice melts in the spring. And then the last one is Bumblebee Watch, pretty self-explanatory. They collect data on bumblebees, which is super important because bumblebees are on the decline and they're super important for our ecosystems as a whole, as they're pollinators. So here at the Kensington Conservancy, we mainly use two of these community science programs, iNaturalist and Ebird. So before I get talking about those two projects, I'm gonna tell you about why we keep track of these species. So the main one is we want to have a sense of the biodiversity that's on our properties. If we have a big property that's got a bunch of different habitat types like wetland, forest, fields, it's good to know that there's a lot of biodiversity in there, and we'd expect with those kind of habitats to have good biodiversity. And then if it's a property that's, you know, kind of monoculture, not monoculture, but, you know, rocks with a few trees, say it's an island, then there's probably lower biodiversity, but it's still important to keep track of that. Another major reason is to be able to detect changes over time. This is especially important when we're dealing with climate change, especially going forward into the future. So if we, you know, right now it's 2021, we have a list of species that are on our properties. And then 10 years from now, it's pretty much the same, but, you know, we're seeing a few new species on that list and maybe not seeing one or two that we used to. And then over time, it'll be slowly changing, but over time, let's say in 100 years now, it might be a very different species lists on our properties. And then being able to have those lists to compare over time is important to see the effects of probably the climate change, but other factors as well. And by keeping these lists, we're able to keep track of two very important species groups, which are species at risk and invasive species. If we have species at risk on our property, then that means that that property is probably even more important to protect, because those species are on decline, but are using our properties to hopefully, you know, reproduce and thrive. So it's important to make sure those properties are protected. And keeping track of invasive species for the opposite reason is we want to get rid of them because they are most likely harmful for our native species. So we want to make sure we know where they are and how much of it there is, and take corrective action. Plus, by contributing this data to community science programs, scientists, other conservationists, and whoever else can access this data for the projects that they are conducting on a larger scale to make decisions about managing and protecting species. And lastly, because it's fun, especially for me, I really enjoy just keeping lists of what species I find and what species are found on certain properties. So that's another reason. So iNaturalist, this is just a quick year in review graphic that iNaturalist came up with 2020. They had 22.5 million observations of plants and wildlife throughout the year for almost 200,000 species, which is pretty incredible pretty incredible numbers. So iNaturalist is a pretty complex website. There's a lot going on, and I don't have the time to get into everything. But the way it works is projects that collect different types of data. So I have created projects for all of Conservancy's nature preserves. As you see here, there have been almost 4,000 observations seen on our property for 880 species, which is pretty good, in my opinion. And that is over 35 different people contributing. And we've got some fun stuff.
Could Ann Cranston mute the phone? We're getting some background noise.
I was just about to say that.
I don't have it. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so we've, of those 4,000, almost 4,000 observations, almost half of them are research grade. A little bit need ID, and the rest are casual. Those were just kind of historical entries that I entered without photos. This is the fun breakdown. Almost half of the observations have been plants. A good chunk are insects and birds, and then smaller groups of different taxonomic groups. So then for each property, I've created its own project, which keeps track of the species on that project, or on that property, sorry. And if you were at our last presentation a month ago that kind of talked about our properties, you'll recognize these names of them. So the black hole has the most species, 473, but the Boyer Preserve is not far behind with 474. These are two of our largest and most diverse habitat types, which explains the high number of species, plus they're the ones that we visit most often. So of course, we're probably going to collect more data over time. The black hole is where I take most people for hikes, and the Boyer Preserve is where the Kensington Conservation Center is located. So that's where I, over the year, spend the most time. And then going down the list, as you know, the properties get smaller. These ones down here are smaller properties, so of course we probably have less species on them. This is an example of what the Black Hole Preserve project looks like. Same kind of stats if you clicked on stats as the overall Nature Preserves project. And it shows just some recent observations. So one of the nice things is you can explore maps on iNaturalist. This is the Boyer Preserve, which is outlined here. The Kensington Conservation Center is in the top left-hand corner here. So I see a lot of birds, insects, mammals, plants around the building. So that's why there's a big cluster of observations here. But then you'll see the scattered observations throughout the property, mostly along where the hiking trails are, but at other points as well. And if you click on any one of these dots, it'll bring up some information on what that observation is. For example, I zoomed in here a bit and took a screenshot and clicked on one, and it was a white spotted Sawyer beetle. that I photographed back in 2017. And if I click on the link on that little pop-up, I can bring up the actual observation, which shows the photo, has the date that I observed it, the date that I submitted it to a naturalist. So it took me over a year to submit this actual photo. And you can other information about it. This is just a map of all our properties that the Kensington Conservancy protects, and then it shows all the various data points on them. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about observations and how they become research grade. So this is a picture of a big tooth aspen leaf that I saw actually just a week or two ago when I was hiking along the Foster Parkland and walking trails. So I took a photo of it and I submitted it to a naturalist, and then somebody came along and agreed with my identification, which means that is now research grade. You know, oops, I gotta go back. And a research grade observation means that the identification is confirmed. I'm not uploading something and misidentifying it. And then research grade observations go into a large database that people can download for their scientific purposes. But if you don't know the species, you can still enter it as kind of, oops, looking at the wrong thing. You can enter it as, you know, the genus or the family or the kingdom or any kind of higher level taxonomic category that you want. So I was able to figure out that this was in the genus of Polytrichium, which is haircap mosses, but I'm not familiar enough with haircap mosses to identify it down to species, and nobody has come along and identified it for me. So it's just left as haircap mosses and needs ID. Then there's times where users can misidentify things. So I uploaded this little fly that I caught in my net one day on the Blackpool Preserve. And since it looked like a goldenrod gal fly, which there's lots of goldenrod gals, they're the little balls you see on goldenrod on the stems. That's just what I assumed it was. But no, this expert on flies came along and identified it as Eurosta fenestrata, which is similar to a goldenrod gal fly, but different. And then I looked it up, I researched it, and definitely, yeah, the markings on the wing were very unique to the species. And that's what it was. But what was really cool about this observation was, at the time, it was only the second observation of the species on iNaturalist. This one here in the St. Joseph Channel area, and a year or two before there was one down here in the United States. Off the top of my head, I don't know what exactly state that is, but regardless, there was one there. And so that was really neat that I was only the second person to ever take a photo of that species and upload it to iNaturalist. Since I did that, someone else uploaded one in Alberta. So that was really cool. I don't think it's, in my research, it's not really a rare species or anything. I found a report that included observations from a few years ago in the Ottawa area. I think it's just, there's not a lot of people out there photographing these flies and uploading them to iNaturalist, but still pretty cool. And now I'm going to talk about some other cool observations that have been seen on TKC properties, starting off with this bobcat that Rob Rutledge saw on the Ripple Rock Preserve this past summer. Bobcats aren't necessarily a rare species for our area, but they're certainly cool. I was pretty envious because I'm still yet to get a half decent photo of a live bobcat. So this bobcat was crossing a little dam at the south end of the wetland that, yeah, it's really cool. Great horned owl. This is a young one that was just born that spring. that was hanging out with a sibling of its and at least one of the two adults on the Foster Parkland and walking trails up by the south lookout that overlooks the high school and the highway heading west. It was actually found during a forest therapy session that TKC was running. I guess this young one was watching everyone do their forest therapy in a circle. And then they hung around for a few days, so I was able to go see it myself. Being able to see owls out in the daytime's, not super common, and it being on TKC property was really cool. This next one is a moose. This was right at the Kensington Conservation Center. We were about to have lunch, and one of our summer field technicians was heating up his food in the microwave, and just while he was waiting, decided to look out the side door, and there was a moose standing in our parking lot. So he yelled at us, "Grab your camera, there's a moose." And we all went running, and I was able to snap this photo of the moose just off the driveway and actually kind of hung around for the day. So that was pretty cool. We don't get to see them too often, even though we know they're around. And everyone's favorite flower, it seems, pink lady slipper. This is an orchid that is found pretty regularly, especially on TKC properties around wetlands and stuff. But everyone gets excited when we see them on our hikes that we offer. Now into the little more unusual stuff. This one is called Andrew's Bog Orchid, which is one of only 4 known sites that this orchid is known to occur in North America. It's actually a hybrid between 2 different species, lesser purple fringed orchid and ragged fringed orchid. 2 species that are relatively common, but based on the type of habitat that they like, they don't really overlap close to, there's not often that there's the same kind of habitats very close together. And then when that does happen, the probability of the seeds reaching each other and creating viable offspring is not very likely. So this plant is pretty rare. It's on our Black Hole Preserve. Rob Rutledge actually found it 3 or 4 years ago, and it's been blooming back there ever since. So really cool. You see on the map here, it looks like there's multiple observations, but because this is so rare, iNaturalist automatically obscures the location and randomly picks a point for each observation within a 20 by 20 kilometer square. So since this has been photographed a few times, that's why it's showing multiple points, but it's only really been seen in one spot. The next one is least bittern. This bird I heard calling from the Stobie Creek wetland this past spring. Least bittern is a species at risk in Ontario. I think they estimated only 1,500 of them left. They're a very secretive little heron-like bird that lives in wetlands. And we're at about where the north end of their range. So you really wouldn't expect to see them any further north. I'm gonna play the call that I recorded of it calling. It's kind of a really low coo 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 that it's hard to hear with all the background noise going on, but hopefully you can pick it out here. So hopefully you're able to hear that. If not, you might have to, and you're interested, send me an email and I'll send you the file, and you might have to, hold a phone or something right up to your ear, but you can hear it if you're able to hear the recording well. This was really exciting because, again, it was on TKC property and has never been recorded within our focus area in modern times. There's a historical record from like the 1940s or something, but since they're so secretive, we couldn't really determine if they were breeding or not, but hopefully they'll come back next year, and maybe we'll be able to record some breeding evidence. Playing again. Next. Prickly hornwort. this is a aquatic plant, very similar to the very common coontail. It is not a species at risk in Ontario, but has a very, very irregular distribution in the province and is listed as a species that might become endangered someday. If you look at the map here, there's quite a few in the St. Lawrence River, Ottawa area, and then not much else in Ontario except for our observation around here. And since I found this washed up on the shore of Coatsworth Island, we actually found a bunch of it in the Denver River, and I also found it in Caribou Lake. So it seems like there might be a fairly healthy population of this aquatic plant in our area. So that was pretty exciting to discover. Brassy minnow. I got pretty into trapping minnows this summer on TKC property and figuring what species were in our wetlands. Again, brassy minnow, if you look at the map here, has an irregular distribution in Ontario. And the one fish expert in Ontario was pretty excited about this find, so that was neat. Another orchid, Club Spurred orchid. This one was photographed by Rob Rutledge in the hole in the wall. It's not super rare, but it takes some effort to find it, and it's a pretty cool looking flower. So I thought I'd include it in the presentation here. Appalachian brown. This is a butterfly that is pretty uncommon for the area, although it seems like we might be at the north end of its range based on a lot of recent observations in the past few years. And so finding one on this one was at Archibald Homestead. So that was pretty cool. And so that's it for unusual observations and other interesting ones. There's, tons really. I could be here for hours talking about them all. But this is another neat feature of iNaturalist. You can look up range maps. So this is the range map of sightings of white-tailed deer. So you can, type in any species and see where they're found. So there's been quite a few on the Ripple Rock Preserve and around Deborah area. Obviously, we know white-tailed deer are all over the place. There's, not a lot of people submitting sightings, but it's cool to see. You can look this up for any species. In addition to keeping track of species found on the Kensington Conservancy's actual nature preserves, we also keep track of species within our focal area. We obviously don't want to just, focus solely on the properties that we protect. We want to keep an eye on species that are found in our area as a whole. So this number jumps a bit. About 400 more species have been seen within our focal area than just on our properties. And this is a map that shows our focal area and then all the observations within it. It's quite a few. So if you're out and about within this area or anywhere you are really, hit submit your data. So this is how you do it, at least on the desktop version of iNaturalist. You take all your photos and you can drop and drag them into their uploader, and then you fill out the information like, date and time that you saw them. Usually this is auto-populated with modern cameras. It includes this information automatically. And then you enter the location, and then you enter the species name, and then you submit. But the really cool thing about iNaturalist is they have a very good photo recognition software that can pretty accurately tell you what the species is if you don't know. So this is just an example. If I click that name, it'll pop this up, and yep, that's a mallard in the photo, and that was the top guess, was mallard. So you can easily select that species, or if it's something you're not familiar with, do some research and see if that is indeed what it is or not. You can also upload observations through the app on any tablet or smartphone. It's pretty straightforward. You take a picture, you upload it, submit it. So now I'm going to transition over to Ebird. So for most of our properties that have people going to them, I have set up what's called an Ebird Hotspot. where people can submit data on the birds that they've seen, and it automatically collects that data, much like the projects on a Naturalist. So this is the hotspot for the Foster Parkland and walking trails and the Kensington Conservation Center. So you can see that between these two properties, 149 different bird species have been seen. Over almost 1,000 checklists. Most of those are mine. We have feeders here, so I'm often submitting checklists throughout the day of what feeder birds are at our feeders. So it's and is a good way to keep track. And same with our black hole preserve. 93 species have been seen here. It lists them all. And so if you're, wanting to submit data to eBird, it's pretty complicated. It takes a while to get used to, but this is kind of the basics. Is you put in the date that you were observing birds, your observation type, if you're walking, if you're standing, those are your two main ones. Time, how long you were standing there walking for, how many people you were with, and you hit continue. And then it brings up a list of potential bird species found in that area. And then you type in, I saw 2 blue jays, 1 raven, 2 chickadees, and a white-breasted nuthatch. And let's say those are all the birds I saw. I click submit, and then it brings up a checklist that shows my list of species and all the other information. So as I said, eBird can be pretty complicated to figure out at first. It's overwhelming. There's a lot of different protocols and stuff. So they actually offer a free course called eBird Essentials. I recommend that anyone who is serious about using eBird take this free course to learn about it. Besides submitting data to eBird, you can, much like the white-tailed deer map, this is the common raven map for our area, and you see that there's points all over the place. Common ravens are obviously a very common bird here. The red points are recent sightings, and all the blue ones are ones, I think, a month and older. Here's one for eastern bluebird. This is a popular bird for our area because they're very pretty. And you see that they're, seen in a bunch of different places. And if you actually go zoom in more, you'll see that primarily the sightings are in places with open fields rather than deep in the forest, which makes sense because they like open fields. And then eBird can also be used to look for locations to go birding. This is a map of all those hotspots that I was talking about. Not just TKC ones, but any other popular birding destination has a hotspot that collects data. So you can scan these maps to look for good places to look for birds. And then eBird uses all that data to create a bunch of very interesting maps and other scientific outputs. This is the relative abundance map for American robin. So you see that north in Canada here, robins are very widespread. As you get a bit further north, there's a little less red, so there's probably less of them. The middle United States, for the most part, is where they're found year-round. And then the southeast is where most of them are only found in the non-breeding or winter season. Here's another example. This is Canada warbler, which is a species at risk here in Ontario. Most of them breed in the boreal forest, which is this portion of northern Ontario and near us and into Quebec in the northeast United States. And then they're seen in migration, and then it seems like they're not seen in migration very much in the southern states, but then they get picked up down here in Mexico and Central America, and then they spend their winters in South America and along this kind of C-shaped area. Now I'm curious as to why they're not elsewhere, but I'll look into that for another day. And here's another similar one, common nighthawk, another species at risk here in Ontario. You can actually see that they're much more abundant on the west coast than they are in the east, and then also go down to South America for the wintertime. So that's all I have for our presentation tonight. I'm just going to give a quick plug for our next webinar, which is going to be all about spring birding, taking place again on the last Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. I will have registrations open by some point tomorrow, and I will send out all the notices. The end of March is a good time to talk about this because come April and especially into May, birds are going to be showing up all over the place. So that's a good time for a refresher or an introduction to spring birding. So thank you. Hopefully you all learned something. Here's my contact info. I'm sure most of you have my email already since I emailed you the link for this presentation, but if you have further questions after tonight, feel free to reach out via email or give me a call. So I'm going to end my presentation here and open it up for questions.
Carter, there was one question about the abundance maps in Ebird. Are they generated from their data that has been entered? Is that how they get them?
Yes.
Okay.
It's all from Ebird data, I'm pretty sure. I think I'm not sure the math that goes into it, but this kind of projections as well. Like if there's areas with a low number of sightings, just because, you know, there's nobody there to report the sightings, I think they account for that and kind of fill in the map. But I'm pretty sure all those abundance maps are from Ebird data. And if you actually go to Ebird's website and go to the science portion and look up those abundance maps, they actually have like animated ones that kind of show them move throughout the year. You know, like it shows the birds moving up, spreading out in the breeding season, then coming back down. It's really neat.
Someone would also like information on the Ebird course that you recommended.
That's from Joni. Joni, I'll email you the link.
Okay.
That's the easiest way.
Carter, it's Alden. I have a question for you. First of all, great presentation. You're obviously prolific on that. I think one of the slides said 7,000 plus observations you had already logged in. I'm just wondering what we're doing to engage other TKC members or local members of the community to participate in community science beyond you. Do we have a program to try to encourage more people to do this?
Not yet, but tonight's presentation is the first step.
There we go.
Well, actually, that's not entirely true. Last year, through the Kensington Conservancy, I tried to run what was called the Tkc Nature Challenge 2020, which was kind of a challenge to see how many species we could collectively see within the year within our focus area. The idea was to engage TKC members, especially those who, you know, come here for the summer. But this year, nobody could come here, so it kind of was just me contributing to it. But it was unfortunately not a great year to start that. But yeah, this was the first step in that. And as you know, we get into spring and there's more things to see, I'm planning on doing something to get more people involved. I haven't come up with a concrete plan yet, but yes, there will be something.
Just strikes me something that especially kids might be really engaged in.
Yeah.
We did it the right way.
The one issue is that since this data is getting used for scientific purposes, you know, young kids, it can be, you know, it's good to introduce them to it and the concept and everything, but it can be difficult to get them to do it. But it's always great to introduce them to it, and, you know, kids who are slightly older probably can get the hang of it. So yeah, we'll definitely incorporate that into our children's programming somehow this year, assuming we can actually do something.
Hi, Carter. I have a question or comment too. Jim and I came down to see you a couple summers ago. Of course, we haven't been able to get there this summer from Minnesota, but you know, we're still eager to get something going down at Basswood. We're at Big Basswood Lake, and we've got a friend here, Marilyn Kellum, too, who we've both been thinking about how to get started on engaging people in some citizen science, community science. And so I don't know, just we don't have a plan. We don't even know if we're going to get back up there this summer, but we're always keeping that in mind, and appreciate your, I mean, it's just amazing what you do and what the Conservancy does. And Yeah, so we hope we can get something together. I also have a question too. You said, we talked about invasive species, and try to get rid of the invasive species, but with the climate change, does that affect about who you tolerate and who you don't of the invasive species, or does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, well, I don't have much actual experience with invasive species because luckily we're still far north enough and that most of the invasive species haven't hit us yet. And we're, we're rural enough too where, people, it's less likely for these invasive species to spread into our properties because it's not like a city park where people are, hundreds of people are going in and out every day and dragging seeds in and out and all that kind of thing. So at this point, I don't have a concrete answer for you. The only thing we've really had to do invasive species wise has been dig up a few, purple loosestrife plants in the wetlands, but those for the most part have been, they introduced a beetle that's dealt with it anyway. So we haven't really this problem anymore. But as climate change continues on, my uneducated guess would be that it's more likely that these species will move further north and it will become a problem. So maybe one day we might have to make those kind of decisions as to what we do tolerate and what we don't.
Yeah.
Obviously, some invasive species are worse than others, right? And I'm guessing we only have limited time and energy to put towards these as well. It's not like we can just say, okay, we're going to go get rid of all the invasive species today, right? It's going to takes a lot of time and effort and money. So I'm sure we'll get to that point where we might have to pick and choose someday.
Well, thank you. And we hope to see you down. We hope we can all get together down at a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And if you want, I'm definitely willing to help you out with more ideas for getting your, the big Basswood Lake folks involved.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely
Thank you.
keep in touch, figure something out.
Carter, great presentation. Thank you. I have to leave now, but that was very informative. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
I'm in the same boat, Carter, but thank you so much. And congratulations again on being named the new executive director. That's just so exciting.
Thanks, Terry. Appreciate it. I'm excited too.
Carter, Susan and Patrick also signing off with thanks for this great session tonight and congratulations. We're so glad we have you as our new executive director.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Are there any other questions for Carter tonight? I think he's done an excellent job and we're looking forward to the next one, and we can mark our calendars right now and sign up this week or whenever. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate your time.
Just letting you know, Carter, I put a useful link for you in the chat from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature on the impact of climate change on invasive species. So
perfect. Thank you.
A lot of stuff in there for your reading on a snowy winter night.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Carter, and congratulations on your new position. Let me know if there's anything that I can do. Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. Well,
Take care. Thanks.
Have a good evening, everyone.